of City Club Forums is provided by the Nordson Corporation Foundation.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Hewitt Shaw, the President of the City Club's Board of Directors. It is my privilege today to introduce to you the Honorable Gary Doer, the Ambassador of Canada to the United States of America. We are truly pleased to have with us today our country's, our states, and indeed our city's next-door neighbor, as represented by the Ambassador. We normally, on a weather day like today, I would apologize for the sudden change in the weather, but I'd like to think that a Canadian can come into Cleveland and deal with this weather undaunted. So we will make him feel even more at home with our weather today. The relationship between Canada and the United States of America has been cultural, it has been strategic, and it has been economic, aside from being geographic. So, and two good examples of that are going back to 1955, the establishment of the Great Lakes Commission to promote the development of the conservation of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River. All 8 of our Great Lakes states are members of that commission. Another is the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement, which began in 1989. Today, Canada is the largest customer of 34 of our states, with over 8 million U.S. jobs dependent upon trade with Canada. Ohio sells more to Canada than it does to its next 14 largest international destinations, and more than 300,000 jobs in the Buckeye State depend upon our trade relationship with Canada, with a value of over $24 billion. So it's obvious from those numbers and others that geography matters, and we couldn't have a better neighbor to our north than the Canadians. Gary Doer assumed his responsibilities as Canada's 23rd representative to the United States in 1989. Prior to taking up his current position in Washington, Ambassador Doer served as Premier of Manitoba for 10 years. During that time, he worked extensively with U.S. governors to enhance U.S.-Canadian cooperative activities on trade, agriculture, water protection, climate change, and renewable energy. The ambassador won 3 consecutive elections as Premier of Manitoba with successive increased majorities. In 2005, he was named by Business Week magazine as one of the top 20 international leaders on climate change. His government introduced balanced budgets during each of those 10 years he was in office, reducing many taxes, including a plan to eliminate small business tax. And as I read that, it occurs to me that he may be better spending his time down in Washington right now helping those folks than speaking to us today, but we are delighted to have him. As the Premier, he led strategic investments in healthcare, education, and training, and infrastructure. So with that, it is our pleasure, and we look forward very much to his remarks, to present to you today at the City Club of Cleveland the Ambassador of Canada to the United States of America, Gary Doer.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hewitt, and it's a wonderful privilege to be here at the City Club of Cleveland. Being a Canadian, I always have weather mentioned to me. As a new ambassador to Washington a couple of years ago, they had that massive blizzard which closed down Washington day after day after day, and the media would call the embassy every day to find out if we were still open, because all of Washington except the North Dakota and the Montana delegation was watching Oprah and not working. And we did manage to get 10 people in every day, just so when CNN or phoned us, we could say, oh yeah, we're working, we're Canadians, we're here, everything's fine. I joked with some of the people this morning talking about weather, just so you know, we know that everybody blames the horrible weather on a Alberta clipper or a cold front from Canada. But just so you know, we have reciprocity on weather. We blame any major storm that we receive in Canada as a Colorado clipper, Colorado low that results in blizzards in Canada. So there's reciprocity in terms of weather responsibility that takes place. It's great to be here at the City Club of Cleveland. I walked by the hallway and noticed the pictures of some of the prominent people that have spoken over the years. President Reagan, Bobby Kennedy, Condoleezza Rice, and Anthony Scalia. And I do have a connection with Anthony Scalia. I was at a forum with him, an international forum, a few years ago, and we were arguing. Now, he's the Supreme Court judge, so I don't know whether I could call my discussion with him an argument. He didn't hold me in contempt, but I did have a good argument with him about the legal framework for the International Joint Commission, which I think was brought in by President Taft, who was from Ohio. And I think his grandson was then later governor of Ohio. So I did stand up for Cleveland and Ohio and for the Great Lakes in terms of its legal authority as a treaty between Canada and the United States to protect water that exists between our two countries and has existed in a managed way for over 100 years now with the International Joint Commission. It is interesting here to recognize that the Great Lakes represents 20% with the St. Lawrence Seaway, 20% of the fresh water in the world, and we're pleased we've got a new agreement on water quality agreement on the Great Lakes, and we share 3 oceans together, so we have a lot of responsibility on managing water. It's great to see Admiral Parks here today, a good friend of Canada, because we are working together on getting common ballast water laws to make sure that we can protect our water systems from invasive species coming into through the St. Lawrence Seaway into the Great Lakes. And we don't want 2 or 3 different rules and laws in Canada and 8 or 9 different laws or rules in the United States. And we don't want to just have the lowest common denominator. So we are now working on a new high standard of laws in Canada that have been agreed to, and the Coast Guard has recommended that to the EPA, and we're hopeful we can implement that in a long-term and positive way. I also want to say that the Admiral did point out to me Whiskey Island. I hadn't seen it before. Roy Norton, the Consul General, who knows everybody in Cleveland, I am informed, and he does a great job as the Consul General in this area. He and I were at the Admiral's office, and he pointed out Whiskey Island, which I understand was part of our 2-way trade between Canada and the United States and Cleveland. And I always find the trade with whiskey is easier than some other trade items that we have between our two countries. When I was in Texas, I was joking with Governor Perry, who was giving me a rough time about Manitoba having the largest per capita consumption of Slurpees, that in fact, Texas is the largest per capita consumer of Crown Royal whiskey manufactured in my home province of Manitoba. And I now think that it's easier to put Crown Royal in a pipeline than oil to get it approved in the United States. But that is not the official diplomatic statement of Canada. I can't use that in any way, shape, or form. Roy and I have been working in this region with you, and we want to continue to work with you on getting the second bridge in Detroit, Windsor region approved. And why should we do that? I think 1/3 of the goods that are traded into Canada on either side of the border come through that transportation portal. And we think it's really, really important to get another bridge at that location. We've had a referendum. It was kind of David versus Goliath. We were not Goliath this time. A person spent $30 or $40 million. We had a humble campaign of $1 million, even though Canada couldn't participate legally in a campaign, but companies doing business on both sides did. And the referendum was defeated, so we are allowed to go ahead with getting a presidential permit and getting that bridge built and getting that transportation efficiencies between our two countries improved again between our two countries. This is very much part of the new agreement we have between the Prime Minister and the President of the United States, where we have a beyond the border vision, where we build infrastructure to improve efficiency between our two countries, but we also manage risk by trying to manage it at the perimeter, as we've done over the last 54 years with NORAD. We've protected the Canada and United States airspace and sea areas with NORAD rather than wait for something to happen inside of our two countries. So we have now a new agreement to manage risk between our countries by sharing risk information to keep our citizens safe and try to work on common sense pre-inspections, common sense frequent traveler programs, common sense cargo inspection systems, just kind of align what we're doing in either country to make it not only safer but more efficient for the trade of goods and services between our two countries. We also have a regulatory reform table, so all those nitpicking differences between our two countries, we now have a table for your businesses to work with us together to try to get these little differences that affect the supply chain. We've got a table now to align those differences and make sure that consumers get better prices because of alignment, and businesses can have more efficiency in trading between our two countries. Now, why is that important for Ohio? You sell more goods to Canada than I think the next 11 countries combined. That's very consistent with Canada and United States trading relationship. Canada buys more goods and services from the United States than the whole European Union put together. And so you sometimes hear the term trading partners in the U.S. and in Washington. Sometimes that means to Americans or Canadians that they're buying and not getting any benefit out of it. Here in Ohio, we are buying more goods, as I say, as customers than any other country. And in business, it's crucial to keep your good customers as good customers. You want to have new customers. You want to diversify. We want to diversify. U.S. wants to diversify. But you want to maintain your strong customer base and continue to expand that as much as possible. So we think your trade is very, very important with Canada. I think you have a $4 billion surplus. And sometimes if I run into somebody that's protectionist on the Canadian side or on the American side, we point out how many jobs are available and expanding with the trade relationships that we have. It's sometimes easier to have a bumper sticker politically to say buy Canada or buy America, but our view is that buy Canada is less trade Canada, and less trade Canada is less jobs Canada. That is 3 bumper stickers, which is impossible to get on any kind of vehicle, but it is important to get the 3 sentences out because it is, in the end of the day, more jobs and more improvement on the quality of life by maintaining our trading relationships. So that's what we're trying to do. That's kind of our message to you and with you to continue to keep our elected representatives on both sides of the country maintaining the supply chain for the biggest customers we each have and improving that for the economic benefit of our two countries. We also believe in diversification of markets. And so we are negotiating with the European Union. That may be an important trade agreement for Canada and the European Union. But we're also with you on what we call TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. We are trying to get a new international trade agreement that includes Canada, United States, and Mexico, includes other countries in the Americas, but a new trading relationship with the emerging markets of Asia. And why do we want to have that? We want to have the rule of law working for both our countries, Canada and the United States, as part of that trading relationship. We want to have and need to have the ability to have reciprocity. You can't have trade without reciprocity. And we want to get that at the earliest possible moments in terms of dealing with these trading or emerging markets. And so we are a partner with the United States on these new international trade agreements. And we think those are extremely important for our two economies. In terms of Canada and United States, we are friends, we are neighbors, and we are allies. Ever since the War of 1812, which of course both of us claim we won, right, Admiral? We both claim we won it. And of course Canada did, but ever since then, we've actually fought together in all the major conflicts: World War I, World War II, the Korean War. We were together in Afghanistan. We remain together in Afghanistan today. We were part of the discussions about what was happening in the Arab Spring. When the Prime Minister and the President get together, the media ask about this irritant and that irritant. Well, they're working on keeping our country safe and keeping the world safe. That's what they're discussing at meetings that takes place in either Washington or Ottawa. And of course, with the developments lately, there is some very, very serious discussions that have taken place, you know, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, on the Arab Spring, Tunisia, Egypt. Then they discuss what may take place in Libya when there is a potential opportunity and a liability for innocent people in Libya. We joined together with our allies, United States and Canada, on the mission to not only save the people in Benghazi 2 years ago, but also to work together to have a regime change in that country. We like you, believed Gaddafi was a person who's, to quote the President, had blood on his hands from terrorist acts in the past. And so we worked as allies with you. In fact, there was a general from Canada who was trained in the United States, General Bouchard. Great guy. He hopes, except for the fact that he hopes for the Montreal Canadiens, a great guy who ran that mission with the 24 NATO countries and 4 additional countries to be successful. We continue to talk about challenges that we have. We're together on sanctions in Syria. We're working together on how best to proceed in Syria to keep the region safe. We, of course, have joined together with you with sanctions on Iran. We want those sanctions to work. We don't want, and we will not tolerate, like you, Iran obtaining nuclear weapons. We have worked together for years on Iran. You've probably seen the movie Argo, with a Hollywood version of what happened with the Canadian ambassador Ken Taylor taking 6 American diplomats and protecting them and working with the CIA to get them out of Iran in a safe way. By the way, if you get something in a Hollywood movie, it's worth, you can't serve enough sandwiches at the embassy to get credit like you can with a Hollywood movie, good or bad. We've had a long history working with you, and we certainly support your view that it represents a real risk to the people in the neighborhood of the Middle East if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, and it represents a real risk to all of us. So we are, when the two leaders get together, they're talking about very, very serious security issues that confront the world, and we work together as allies, as we have been on the major conflicts over the decades together. It therefore makes a lot of sense to us that we talk about opportunities in North America on having greater energy independence from the Middle East in our own neighborhood. We very much believe that what the President said when he was campaigning in October of 2008, when he promised to wean the United States off of Middle Eastern and Venezuelan oil, that was a good idea at that time. We actually support his speech at Georgetown University about 18 months ago when he again talked about energy independence in this neighborhood, Canada, United States, and Mexico, as a viable and doable option. We think it just makes a lot more sense to have energy independence in our neighborhood something that has been talked about in the United States since Richard Nixon was president, but something that's actually doable with all the great innovations that are taking place in Canada and in the United States. And we are very dedicated to being part of the solution for having this energy strategy in our neighborhood. And it's not just oil, which gets a lot of news, but it starts with energy efficiency as the first strategy. And so that's why in the auto industry, we not only work together to make sure that we could bridge the challenges of the auto industry in Canada and in the United States with a short-term bridge of money that is being repaid, but we also worked with the United States to get new vehicle emission standards, which would take the California tailpipe emission standards, or take the Quebec standards, or the BC standards, or the New York State, or some other state standard, and combine them not only with tailpipe emission standards, but air conditioning standards into one energy efficiency improvement over 2 steps. And it will represent a major reduction in per capita fuel consumption. It also represents cleaner air, cleaner water, and ultimately we're selling more cars because there's less, quote, gas guzzlers being sold in our North American market by North American cars as part of the first step in vehicle emission standards, which is part of what we're trying to do together to implement reductions in greenhouse gases on both sides of the border that we agreed to in Copenhagen. So the first step is energy efficiency, in our view, for purposes of energy independence. The second step is renewable energy. And sometimes we can get great renewable energy. You got the snow today. What we do in Canada, many provinces, we pick it up, we put it in our riverways, we let it flow through turbines, and we sell it back to the United States at 6 cents a kilowatt hour as hydro. So this is gold for us if I can get to the airport today. But we like to believe that renewable energy is very important. Sometimes it's hard to get renewable energy approved. There's a proposed transmission line to take wind from Montana to Lethbridge, Alberta. Renewable energy everybody loves, but nobody wants to agree to the transmission line. I was joking this morning that on both sides of the border, it's 1 lawyer per megawatt to get a transmission line approved to get this renewable energy back and forth. So we've all got to make our processes a little more decisive. It's a word that is very, very important. We believe that shale gas is a tremendous, tremendous part of energy independence. Of course, you have it in Ohio, and you require, I think, in my view, is shale gas in either Canada and the United States, we require a real job to explain to people how it can be developed safely for the water table, which it can and has been in our 2 countries, and how also that represents a huge opportunity to have less manufacturing jobs be outsourced and return and be insourced into the North American supply chain with A, predictable intellectual property, and B, predictable, affordable, available energy like shale gas. And I think that will be very, very much part of the North American vision for energy independence. And lastly, of course, oil. We are together reducing the amount of oil from the Middle East, reducing the amount of oil that we consume on a per capita basis in North America, Canada, and the United States, increasing the amount of oil developed in the United States domestically in places like the Bakken oil fields, and increasing the amount of oil from Canada coming to the United States. Now, a lot of the publicity is about pipelines, ironically. But we have gone from about 19% of oil from outside of the United States being from Canada to 27%. Some of it and a lot of it through pipelines, which are perceived by and deemed to be by scientists and engineers the safest way to move oil between our 2 countries, and the cheapest way and the less emission way to do it. So it's kind of interesting for me to watch and be part of a debate going on about the Keystone Pipeline. Because first of all, it's oil from the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota and Montana. It's not just Canadian oil, it's Canadian oil and American oil, but it's being opposed. It's being opposed, I think, for all the wrong reasons. Certainly the oil sands continue to be improved in terms of their sustainability and how the stewardship of the oil sands, but the oil is coming from Canada now. If it's not on a pipeline, it's on a train. If it's not on in North Dakota, if it's not on the pipeline that's going to be part of the Keystone Pipeline, it's on trucks. I drive from Manitoba to Montana to ski, and the amount of trucks on those roads are it's just unbelievable. So it makes more sense to have oil being moved, in our view, in a way that's actually more energy efficient. The unintended consequences of opposing a pipeline is actually to have higher emissions and higher costs. But I know facts never get in the way of a good old-fashioned bumper sticker debate between jobs and energy security and people that are opposed to all forms of fossil fuel. So that's certainly our view of how we should proceed on energy security. Finally, I've had the privilege of going to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame here in Cleveland. It reminded me of all my dates, not of all of, I struck out a lot of times. I joked this morning, and every one of those songs reminded me of when somebody put me on the bus, so to speak, and what can you say? But it was a wonderful way to celebrate some of the artists. I know Rush from Canada is being recognized this year. Neil Young, whose first band was in Winnipeg, is recognized in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's 925,000 people from Canada that visit Ohio a year. But we're gonna get it over 1 million as more and more people become aware of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's our target to get people into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and we will not rest until there's 1 million people visiting from Canada to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they too can celebrate the good dates that they had and the defeats that they had as growing up in our country of Canada. It's a great, great place, and this is a great city, and we look forward to working with you on economic opportunities between our two countries. The sky is the limit, and we're going to do it together in a very, very cooperative way. Thank you very, very much for your time here today. Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a Friday forum featuring the Honorable Gary Doer, Ambassador of Canada to the United States of America. We will return to our speaker momentarily for the traditional City Club question and answer period. Please formulate your questions now, and remember to make them brief, to the point, and in the form of a question. We welcome all of you here today and those listening on 90.3 WCPN Idea Stream, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS Idea Stream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. Closed captioning of our programs is made possible by the Nordson Corporation. We would like to welcome guests at tables today hosted by Baker and Hostetler, the Canadian Consul General, the Greater Cleveland Partnership, Port of Cleveland, and Walsh University. Thank you for your support. Today is the annual George Gunn Memorial Forum on the American Economy, made possible by a generous gift from the George Gunn Foundation. Joining us at the head table today is Bob Jacque, Associate Director for the Gunn Foundation. We would also like to welcome today's students to our program. Student participation is made possible by a generous gift from the Jeffrey David Epstein Memorial Fund. Today we welcome students from Hawkins School. Will the students please stand to be recognized? Now we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today is Assistant Director for the 100th anniversary celebration, Betsy Wallace, and Program Director Carrie Miller. First question, please.
Ambassador, in my history of jobs, I spent several years with the New York Power Authority, and it's very hard to find a closer relationship than that between New York Power and Ontario Hydro, since we shared the same water sources called the Niagara River. My question, though, you appear to be a global thinker on world trade. Do you have insights, first, on the future of the European Union, and second, if it should dissolve, what's the impact on the American and Canadian trade?
Well, first of all, people in the debate going on about the fiscal cliff here in the United States will use the term Europe and Greece. It's my personal view, and I think it's the view of Canada, that the U.S. economy, it's both in terms of its innovation and capacity, is not comparable, notwithstanding some of the deficit spending issues in the short term, not even comparable to some of the situations in Europe in terms of capacity to manage the fiscal challenges that are here confronting lawmakers as we speak in Washington. And so in relative terms, sometimes terms are misused, in my view, comparing United States to Europe. It's not even close in terms of its success, and it's a country of can-do people that do get it right, always get it right, and always exceed some of the doomsday predictions that exist. In terms of Europe, we are both concerned about the European situation. We are both pleased with the leadership of countries like Germany to work through the challenges in Europe. We are hopeful that it can stay together, although those decisions will be made outside of our shores. We do want, in Canada, to have the rule of law of trade with Europe. We want access to their markets, and we understand that by having access to their markets, they have access to ours. So whether it's dealing with Canada-U.S. relationship, where states and provinces don't have access guaranteed in NAFTA, we believe in reciprocity. We did that with the Buy America Act a few years ago and the Short-Term Recovery Act, and we believe in reciprocity. But if the European Union, I just think it it has the ability to survive. With every country, I'm not sure, but I think there's a will to keep it going, and they've gone through some very, very tough times. But they represent excellent trading opportunities for both our countries, and sometimes there's protected industries in Europe that we would like to get access to their markets in Europe, but we understand that there's some things that they think are protected in Canada, and I think they believe the same in the United States, and reciprocity is the key to getting those improved trade agreements. Yes.
Hello, Ambassador.
Yes.
In the mid-'80s, I did a term paper in college on acid rain.
Ah, yes.
And actually went to the embassy in Washington, D.C. and talked to a representative there about this issue. How are we doing since then? Because we don't hear much about it, and I would imagine that it was something that the two countries really worked on in order for us not to be hearing much about it today.
Well, when something's successful, you don't hear anything about it. So it's only when conflict it continues to exist or controversy. The acid rain agreement, the last numbers I saw, not only met and exceeded their standards for clean air, but they also overachieved against predictions of the costs it would be for utility prices with the implementation of the acid rain agreement. There was predictions on GDP growth and productivity and cost to consumers, all of which have not come to bear. There has been some small impact, but the predictions of dire consequences with cleaner air didn't come to pass. There was another major agreement you probably studied at the same time called the Montreal Protocol, which was also an agreement that was led by Canada and the United States to eliminate as much as possible the ozone depleting materials that were confronting the world. And so the acid rain agreement and then the Montreal Protocol on ozone depleting materials actually have reduced greenhouse gases more than Kyoto. So when we, and why is that important? The challenge for us is with a climate agreement that the president confronted and our prime minister confronted is that Kyoto didn't have enough countries in it to make it have results in a more international way. Copenhagen does have the opportunity to do that. The agreement that Canada and the United States was partly leading with Montreal Protocol after the acid rain agreement started with 16 countries. It now has 165 countries in terms of ozone depleting material, and that's the way to go in terms of other climate challenges, I believe, that we have. So it's the acid rain agreement. If your paper predicted it would be a good thing, you should have got an A. If your paper predicted it was going to be a bad thing, you should get a retroactive F. It was a good, so I'll have to read your paper now to find out what you predicted.
Ambassador, it's good to hear you talk about the economic climate with the U.S. and Canada, and there's one small area of the economy that we share that you didn't mention, though it was mentioned in the announcements today that the NHL was created 100 years ago. And I know your community, Winnipeg, just recently got a franchise back, but there's no activity because they can't agree on the proper way to structure the business. Has anybody asked you or anybody else to help settle that dispute so we'd have hockey back in Canada and the Canadians would be happy?
Well, if we can get an agreement on the Detroit River crossing, maybe. But no, I think that we are hopeful. From the outside looking in, we are hopeful that the fans' view of getting a season will prevail and they'll get a long contract that it allows the franchises to exist, including Winnipeg, and allows the players to start doing what they get paid for, and that's playing hockey. And it doesn't appear to me, I don't know what's going to happen in the negotiations, but I do believe the president's made a statement in Minneapolis about the fans deserve the owners and players to get an agreement. The prime minister has stated he wants an agreement, and we want the will of the people to prevail in these negotiations. And the fans want hockey, even though we're going to compete with the United States in the World Junior Hockey Championship. Dare I say it.
You have mentioned economic and environmental and security ties, but how can we build increased trade between our students, college and K-12 students, to gain a greater understanding of the interdependence of our countries?
Well, there's a lot of Canadian students that are going to university in the United States, and there's a lot of people training in centers of excellence like the Cleveland Medical School, or Cleveland Medical Clinic here. There's also a lot of American students now going to university in Canada. I think there's lots of youth exchanges between our two countries, but there's no better education of our own young people than traveling to each other's country. Canadians, we have 20 or 35 million people in Canada. There's over 25 million people that visit the United States. And they're mostly family visits because we're close. 90% of Canadians live within 60 miles of the U.S. border. And all my first travel experiences were my first football helmet was bought in Minneapolis, and all my experiences as a child growing up was the road trip to the United States. So I'd like to continue to see more exchanges of students between our two countries, more courses that force students, not force students, but of course encourage students. It was forced when I went to school, but encourage students. Just kidding. To study each other's countries and write papers like Acid Rain, the cooperative things we've done. But I think the people sitting at your table are going to be the next presidents of the United States, the next governors of Ohio, and that's why they're very, very important.
Mr. Ambassador, would you make some comments regarding the general economic conditions in Canada today? Did you have a recession as we had a recession? And how did you fare during this challenging period for us? And also, what is the jobless rate in Canada today? And the debt and the deficit as a percentage of GDP in Canada versus what we have in the United States? And what do you consider to be the biggest economic challenges?
Well, just a couple of questions there, thank you. The deficit as a percentage of GDP currently is 1.5%. I think it's running 9% here. If there's a $2 trillion deal over the next 10 years, and I know the U.S. economy is improving, so there'll be growth, you're going to have probably coming out of this agreement, hopefully out of this agreement, agreement being the hopeful part, about a 4 to 5% gap between revenues and expenditures. But again, the American people, I believe, will find a way to get it done, because that's the people get things done in this country more than any other country. You know, Canada, the United States gets things done. On the issue of the recession, we shared with you the need to bridge the automobile industries, obviously very important in Ohio, very important in Ontario. We thought this was a bridge. We didn't, we thought we would invest and get our money back. Mostly, though, that was the only operating money that was part of our recovery program. We did spend money on capital in the recession. It was all short-term capital. It was a little different than the United States capital program because it was different in two ways. Yours was more in operating as a percentage than ours was. Ours was more in capital. Ours was short-term. And it included universities and colleges because we wanted to not only invest in roads and bridges, which we consider to be very important, and ports. We also wanted to invest in education and training. And there's no other place, everybody uses this term shovel-ready. Well, the only place that's got shovel-ready projects are universities and colleges. Every university president's got another building they want to name after somebody that's already been designed. So most other projects are design. You have to design it first, but in universities and colleges, you already have the design done. So they are actually shovel-ready, and it's really important to invest in innovation. So you're coming out of the recession partly with the knowledge economy having a little bit of a bump, as well as the infrastructure economy having a bump. Where we were also different is we did not have to bail out the banks. And when I first got here as ambassador, as being a former premier, I was quite frankly stunned by the level of anger in the United States with the amount of taxpayers' money that was required to deal with the financial sector. At the same time, housing values were going down. So I think you had a more challenging time because of this situation. Thankfully, the floor in Canada on banks with inspections is a little more, how should we call it, conservative, prudent. It used to be called dull and boring, but boring and predictability is the new sexy when it comes to financial matters, I think. So that would be another difference. But the United States' capacity and their revenues and expenditures, the capacity to deal with the challenges, I think, is very, very doable. And hopefully in the short term there can be some work, because it affects everybody in the world. You talked about Europe. The biggest concern Europe has right now is the U.S. fiscal situation in the fiscal cliff. Same with Canada. Any kind of major reduction in GDP through lack of predictability will result in decreased demand. Decreased demand will result in decreased product and trade, which will result in increased unemployment. And so all of us are quite concerned about that. But we just have a boring financial sector, which we think is good. No bailouts.
Mr. Ambassador, the healthcare system in Canada is one that for a long time has intrigued Americans. During the major debate a few years ago on the Obama health care program, some of the Republicans referred to it as a socialistic type of a medical care delivery system. Others in this country praised it. To what extent would you say that the charge that it is a socialistic system is correct? And second of all, has it been a working, satisfactory system of delivering medical care?
Well, first of all, we didn't participate as Canadians in the debate about what the Canadian system was good or bad in the middle of the political debate. Canadians wouldn't want any American ambassador telling us what's best for us in healthcare, and I certainly realized nobody needed to have another voice saying what's best for the United States in terms of healthcare. On cost, the American system is running up to 18% of GDP. In Canada, it's 11.6% of GDP. Is the Canadian system perfect? No. Is the American system perfect? No. Are there areas that we can continue to learn from and as Canadians, including from the, I've asked Roy, our Consul General, to have a chance to visit the Cleveland Medical Clinic next time I'm here because I've heard wonderful things about it. We can always continue to learn. I think we looked at the gamma knife that was in Cincinnati when I was premier and brought some neurosurgeons and this equipment. We went and bought some ourselves because of the great experience of non-intrusive surgeries for some cancers of the brain. So you can always learn in both countries. I would say that in Canada, improving this healthcare is always an objective, but changing healthcare the way it's administered is not, people would not want that in the country. Any political debate is improvement, not abandonment. Canadians actually can purchase healthcare in the United States. As I say, 90% of people reside within 60 miles of the border. So there are, you know, from Manitoba, the Mayo Clinic was very close when I was premier. So there is the ability to have a comparison for patients if they want to compare it. The one major difference is your cost of your legal system is much higher in the United States than it is in Canada. And that represents just the reality of it. We spend more money on, you spend more money on lawyers than we do on a per capita basis. And that's an issue for the United States to deal with. But we're proud of our healthcare system, but it's every day you've got to improve it. Because every day we all are dealing with imploding entitlements, imploding because of demographics. And if you don't improve, you can't afford it. So we've got to continue to improve. Yes.
Good afternoon. In the United States, 22% of our children live in poverty. And even with that stunning number, there is a move by the Republicans to turn our states into right-to-work-for-less states. It just happened in Michigan, and Michigan, I think, became the 24th state that is a right-to-work-for-less state. My question, which would certainly destroy the economy, lower wages, no health care, and so forth. So my question is, what is the state of unions in Canada? Are they seen as a positive force on the economy and on the middle class, or is there also a move in Canada to destroy unions, which would lead to a destruction of the economy?
Boy, that's a non-political question for a Canadian ambassador. And where do you really stand on the issue? I couldn't tell by your question where you stood. And this is, you know, Ohio. I mean, pretty interesting state in terms of politics from what I can gather. I mean, every reporter in Washington was living in Ohio the last number of months. In Canada, we have a Supreme Court decision that is that if you called the Rand formula decision, and it actually came out of the auto industry, that if you got the benefits of a union in terms of wages and safety and other issues that you didn't have to join the union, but you had to pay the dues. And so it's sort of a principle of you got to pay your way. So I'm not going to get in the middle of beyond that. I'm just going to tell you, or just answer your nonpartisan question with a with a statement about the law in Canada.
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. Yes. My name is Caroline, and I am a student at Berea High School. And my question is, what advice would you give to my generation to help strengthen the economic and educational aspects between our regions?
Well, Caroline, if I had the answer to that, my daughters would be following my advice instead of living their own dreams through education and their future. I think that I do believe in, as you're making decisions, the more positive choices you make in your education, the more doors you keep open for when you decide and what you decide to do later on in life. I would say, so keep those doors open. Don't close a door ever if you can have a chance not to. And secondly, I think you should try to pursue a career. It may take some time. You sometimes have to take jobs. We've all had jobs that have been a little more menial than what we've ended up doing, or there's no such thing as, but we've all ended up with jobs that ended up to another job, to another job. So keep your dream always in mind. Try to live your dream eventually through the career you take, using education as a bridge. And my other advice to young people is reach for the top. There's a lot of room, and so go for it. And it sounds like you are going for it by asking me that question. So you're well on your way.
Ambassador, would you please comment on the warming of the Arctic and what the impact is on the northern reaches of your country?
Well, it's on the northern reaches of both our countries. Admiral Parks was just up in the Arctic with our Coast Guard, his Coast Guard, Alaska, Canada. It's our third ocean that we share. We in Canada are going to be chairing the Arctic Council soon, and then the United States 2 years after that chairs the Arctic Council. The Arctic Council used to be a body that got together and it was a good discussion, but now finally they're coming out with plans of action as opposed to just discussions. Partly because the Arctic ice is melting. The Coast Guard can tell you it's just melting faster than earlier predictions about the pace of that. In Greenland this year, or last year, Secretary of State Clinton and Interior Secretary Salazar represented the United States at cabinet level at those meetings. It didn't always happen that way. That obviously brings more authority to the meetings because people there can say, we're going to do this, as opposed to saying we're going to recommend it. And I think that's an excellent development for the Arctic. We finally have a search and rescue protocol with the Arctic Council, all the Arctic Council countries, which we didn't have before. We have to work towards having the next agreement on the area of environmental mitigation, environmental strategies dealing with the environment, risks to the environment, managing those risks, having a strategy to respond to those risks. And I think also we have to deal with the people that are living there. They don't want some of us, you know, wearing Birkenstocks, I'm talking about myself, you know, telling the people in the Arctic what's best for them. But so really important to work with the people that actually have lived there for generations or have moved there, as well as having a strategy to have action on rescue, action on environment, action on mapping, action on other matters. And, you know, Canada's joined the International Treaty of the Sea. So if there's a border dispute, we can get it resolved by an independent body. We think all Arctic Council countries have joined, except our friends here. So we would encourage you in a non-political way to join the Arctic, to deal with some of these disputes on boundaries. It's important for us to get boundary predictability in the Beaufort Sea before everybody identifies what pot of potential gold is underneath those, underneath that beautiful, beautiful Arctic Ocean adjacent to the Beaufort Sea that's a little bit in dispute. So I think we've got 4 years of leadership between Canada and the United States at the Arctic Council. So the torch is passed to us to take that leadership and make some good decisions. But I recommend strongly we do it with people living as well in the Arctic. They do resent people going to Washington or Ottawa telling them what's best for them. Just the political sense I have of that issue.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Oh, thank you very much.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to a Friday forum featuring the Honorable Gary Doer, Canadian Ambassador to the United States. Thank you, Ambassador Doer. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
PNC is proud to support the presentation of this City Club of Cleveland Friday Forum on WVIZ PBS.
Additional support comes from Cleveland State University. Support for closed caption transcripts of City Club forums is provided by the Nordson Corporation Foundation.